and welcome, Mr. Treasurer. Thank you for joining us on this Memorial Day. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy Memorial Day to all of your viewers, and especially those who have served. Uh, Oftentimes, you hear somebody thanking somebody for their service, but it's a verb. You need to thank them for serving, and it's not just those that we see from time to time, obviously, but those who are missing in action. You know, tens of thousands of soldiers are still missing in action from wars across the world, and so tribute goes out to them.
Well, thank you again for joining us. And I think it's very fitting that you do join us because, in our opinion, you are Mr. Education. You've got your aunts, so you grew up around teachers. You got your start in politics by sitting on the Winston-Salem School Board back in the day. You went on to be a four-term House rep, and most of your legislation was focused around education. Now, as treasurer, you're sitting on the state school board, which produces a lot of governing policies that go all the way down to K through 12 and even into preschool. So I'm glad that one of your first interviews since declaring that you're going to be running for governor is with Ed First Alliance, which is the largest conservative education group in the state of North Carolina. So thanks again.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's a great honor to serve on the State Board of Education. But in addition to that, I wear 19 other hats, and one of those is I sit on the State Community College Board on top of that. So I get to see from the community college perspective as well as the K-12 perspective, and I'm very concerned about public education. I'm not sure that we have the joy of achievement built into our curriculum so that people can have the upward mobility in their life like I had.
Well, that's just that's just it. And so when we look, and we do frequently at the top down policies, and there are many, unfortunately, in North Carolina, that is where the state board or the legislature in some cases makes law that seeps its way down into the district level. One of those policies, and it's very concerning for really certainly the base of the Republican Party, but others, is social emotional learning. Now, for our viewers, if you're new with us, let me just kind of break down what that is. For North Carolina, social emotional learning is mandated in all 12 academic subjects. They marry it into everything from English to the very needed math and reading. I'm not even kidding you. Therapy circles and math. They only had that in my day. Believe me, I would have made much better grades. But, Treasurer, this mandated top-down learning system that's imposed on every school district, that's also complete with these invasive surveys. I mean, on the one hand, we understand it, right? Because most of the funding for local districts comes from the state. But how are we going to really get more local in these policies for education?
Well, it's a very difficult subject, no matter what we're talking about. But at the end of the day, nearly half of the state budget that's currently being debated goes toward public education, and I think that we've lost our way. We've lost our mission. It just seems like that everything we do is focused on indoctrinating and not educating students, and I'm very concerned about that. And one of my education goals as the state treasurer of North Carolina is to have the smartest fourth graders in the United States. And I was visiting with a donor recently, and they said, "Well, that doesn't sound very comprehensive." And I said, "Well, let me tell you what the smartest fourth graders in the United States get you. 10 years from now, the smartest fourth graders get you the smartest workforce. 10 years from now, the smartest fourth graders get you the best qualified students for community college entrance. The smartest fourth graders get you a higher percentage of North Carolina students who are eligible for these coveted in-state slots at our universities. That's what the smartest fourth graders give you." And my focus all the time I've been in Raleigh Sloan is to focus on how we can save a mind, save a life, or save money. And all of my focus during my whole time in Raleigh has been based on that: saving lives, saving minds, and saving money.
Well, I think that's as evidenced by spending, 8 years as a legislator and only having what, 29 bills. Because yeah, I mean that's really so impressive to me, because if a law doesn't extend the liberty of a person and the populace, really, you shouldn't make it. And there's so many, I mean, in my opinion, phony laws or unnecessary regulation done on both sides. And so your legislative collection is very impressive.
Well, thank you. And what your viewers may not know is that 6 of those 8 years, I was in the minority party. So this is under Speaker Black, Speaker Hackney, President Pro Tem Bassanite, Governor Perdue, and Governor Easley, who never vetoed one of these 29 major pieces of legislation. And 21 of these pieces of legislation were when I was in the minority party, sitting on the back row. But what I found in Raleigh, even in the minority party, if you find a way to save a life, save a mind, or save money, that people will listen to you and work with you. And at the end of the day, I don't know what door that you entered to come into the room you're in now, or what door Luke may have entered. But there's a possibility that that door weighs, 50, 75, maybe 150 pounds. But think about how much those hinges weigh. Think about the power of a hinge in relation to a great big heavy door. And when you think about conceptually how we are going to improve public education, we have to think inside the box, outside the box. And then once we figure out what direction we're going in, we've got to use both sides of the box. And that's why I give you the hinge mentality, the hinge analogy. Very quickly, I was asked the other day on an interview about what piece of legislation regarding public education that I think was the most powerful. And not because I wrote it, but because God gave me the vision to see, the humility to listen, and the courage to act 12 years ago to change the kindergarten cutoff date. Now, let's don't get confused about when school is supposed to start, the school start year. We're talking about when children should be allowed to enter kindergarten. We were putting our children, Sloan, for 37 years at a competitive disadvantage simply because of our arbitrary kindergarten cutoff date. Now, my wife, Cynthia, sometimes squeamishes when I use this analogy, but I just want to tell you what was going on in a kindergarten classroom before this date was changed. We had boys in kindergarten who were barely potty trained. Those boys were in kindergarten with 6-year-old girls who knew their letters, knew their numbers, and knew their colors. So even at the get-go, girls are about 1.5 years intellectually smarter than the boys, and some would say that we never catch up. But can you imagine who loses in a situation where you have a 4-year-old boy who is barely potty trained in a classroom with a 6-year-old girl who knows all these things, and then a teacher who's trying to teach to both of those groups of people? So I introduced something called Every Child Ready to Learn. It's going to shock you, but that piece of legislation, Sloan, was 8 words long, not 8 sentences, not 8 paragraphs, not 8 pages, 8 words. It struck October 16th in 4 places and inserted September 1st in 4 places. The New York Times Magazine, and I'll close with this, the New York Times Magazine came into North Carolina and did a 6-page expose. These are big pages and little print. A 6-page expose on our kindergarten cutoff legislation. This is what I mean, and this is how we're going to actually reform public education. We have to have the vision to see, and the humility to listen, and the courage to act.
Well, I want to push back on that a little bit and say that I think you need to add a 4th one, a spine of steel. look, we're in the midst of a revolution, whether or not one wants to acknowledge it, that's their choice. But I mean, after COVID, we began to see what was going on, whether it was the extreme indoctrination coming from, the racial point of view, certainly all of this gender nonsense that we've seen. And so it's going to take people who are in a governing position that govern that seriously, who understand that somebody has to be an adult in the room, period, point blank, end of discussion. I'll give you an example. And this is, not.
Well, I will add to that. And that's what the third thing I spoke about was the courage to act. And once you decide to act, you've got to stand in the box, which is exactly what you just described. I mean, people know what they're seeing, and they know how they feel about what they're seeing. And in any policy at any point in time, it should never be about the next election. It should be about what you put your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand to uphold in terms of your oath of office. We have a lot of Pinots. Now, I'm not a drinker, but I understand that's a part of a word that's associated with wine. Pinot stands for politician in name only. and they peak on election night. When they get elected, they don't accomplish one thing after that point.
Yeah.
And so we've all heard about rhinos. Now I'm introducing a new term to your viewers called Pinots, politician in name only, who don't focus on saving a life, saving a mind, or saving money. And I just want to add this one thing. You talked about COVID. I will tell you, as a person in March of 20, one of the early contractors of COVID, with a blood ox level of 82 while I was consuming 8 liters of oxygen. And what we now know is a deadly blood type, A negative, which is what I have. I mean, this was a serious thing, but I can tell you that the aftermath of shutting down our schools during COVID, the lack of common sense that went into those decisions will never happen in a Folwell administration. And the other thing I wanted to say is this. What COVID did is it put sunshine and spotlight, not only on these issues you're talking about, but on the importance of women in our society. I'm not one of these who think that women talk too much. I mean, I'm surrounded by huge amounts of smart women at the Treasurer's office who keep us in the check delivery business. But what COVID also did is put the spotlight on the importance of women in every aspect of their life. So we are sorry for COVID. We're sorry for lots of things, but putting sunshine on the importance of women in our society is I think a small positive outcome of all this.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, not just because I am one, but because this whole moms movement that we've seen, where a lot of moms are standing up and saying, oh, heck no, I'm seeing what's going on in the curriculum. I'm seeing this, not in all schools, not even in most schools, but in some schools. And so it has been the mothers who have been first to take action. Now we know that certainly a lot of grandparents are involved and a lot of dads are involved, but you're right. We became the tip of the spear for that. So I do want to change gears for a second, because this is so important. Something major happened last week. What I've always said about you publicly is that you're the politician who has really put yourself on the line to actually do something to stop this chemical castration and child mutilation. Really, you had a lawsuit and you're involved with it now. I'll let you talk about it in a second as treasurer, where you said, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to use state funds to pay for elective surgeries. That's not the best use of healthcare dollars. Now, that's the practical answer, and that's the right answer. But it's also a matter of, sometimes we have predatory healthcare providers. We know this, it's sad, but we do, who will say, gosh, we're going to have state funds pay for this. I mean, the sky's the limit, and they do. And in fact, I believe one of the people involved with this lawsuit we were sued, the state of North Carolina, and you in particular, the state plan, was a child, a minor, who had received a full sex change at 16 years old. So you're fighting the good fight. You're actually doing it. Last week, you got some help. 21 state attorney generals from across the country, the usual suspects, Florida and some others, they came to support you in this Fourth Circuit case. I believe is coming up in September. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It's a really important case.
I'll be glad to. And I want to say, obviously, this is a high octane legal matter. And I also want to say something for the record that a lot of your viewers may not have complete knowledge of. The forcing this issue, the reason we're in a suit is because the Board of Trustees of the state health plan, which is appointed by the governor, the president pro tem, the speaker of the House, and myself. This Board of Trustees has always had the flexibility to set benefits. That's what this lawsuit is about. And when you are managing the largest purchaser of healthcare in North Carolina and one of the largest health plans in the United States. Now, I want to put this in context. The amount of people in our plan is almost equal to the number of people domestically that work for Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, Jamie Dimon's JP Morgan, and Jeff Bezos's Amazon combined. That's how large this plan is. So when you have a plan this large, what you have to focus on, especially since we have a $34 billion unfunded liability because of previous poor decisions, when you have a plan this large, Sloan, you have to focus on doing the most good for the most number of people. That's how you set benefits. The previous treasurer had 3 years to put this benefit in place. After I was elected, but before I was sworn in, check the record, she convened a state health plan board meeting and made them vote on this issue. It was a tie vote. Of all the boards that the previous treasurer sat on and all the board members she's been involved in, I think it's the only time she ever broke a tie to put this benefit in place for 1 year. It had a sunset. So part of this original lawsuit was the fact that the Board of Trustees voted to stop paying for these sex transition operations. We never did that. The previous treasurer, if she was really committed to this topic, would have put this in place for good and then made us vote to undo it. She put it in place for 1 year. The benefit sunset after that year. Lawsuits were filed against us and UNC. Now, the Attorney General, who has the responsibility of protecting us, made a decision to represent UNC Healthcare, but not represent me or the state health plan. This is all factual. And my point of saying that to you is that when you're the Attorney General of North Carolina, you shouldn't be able to pick and choose which laws you want to apply or who you want to apply them to. So lastly, this ended up in federal court in Winston-Salem. We asked for a jury trial because of the difference of opinion between this is elective surgery versus medical necessity. We were denied a separate trial. We tried to get it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. I'm not the lawyer in the room, you are, but we were not granted cert. I think that's the right terminology. So now we're at the Fourth Circuit. And what was happening in the Fourth Circuit is that the Fourth Circuit is not just North Carolina folks, it's people from many other states. And there's another case coming in, I believe, maybe possibly from West Virginia, that was going to be in conflict of this. And that's why I believe these states' attorneys generals came to the rescue.
Right. So the Fourth Circuit is more liberal right now than the Ninth Circuit, and that's in no small feat to Trump and Mitch McConnell. Love him or hate him, they did an excellent job on kind of writing the ship out in some of those judicial appointments. But what you're talking about, Mr. Treasurer, is something called a circuit breaker, and it happens when two different circuits happen to reach the same conclusion or different conclusions about the same law at hand. And so in this case, it would be this particular law, and we're not even at the Fourth Circuit yet, so we haven't had anything adjudicated at that level. But at that point, you do want a circuit breaker, because then that's what can queue up a Supreme Court ruling. We were seeing the same thing with Bostock. Fourth Circuit disagrees, I believe, with another circuit, but I'm not sure, and that's probably going to go up to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, that's the way some of these issues have to be solved, because it's not about the law. I mean, people always ask, why are you making these dumb laws? How in the world could we have ever predicted that we'd have to make a law to prevent guys from going into the women's bathroom? I mean, in our wildest dreams 25, 30 years ago, and hence the need to protect the citizens, as what you just said, to do that. And as you know, our organization is very keen on, number one, public health. We look at this way. When we have, for instance, ECU, I'm going to pick on them tonight, going into rural health in 28 or 29 different counties, and they're already a shortage of clinics, a shortage of providers. They're prioritizing what they call gender affirming care. With all due respect, we call it child mutilation, abuse, and sterilization. So they're prioritizing that. We look at the population, Mr. Treasurer. It is an aging population with chronic conditions. And so this is what they're prioritizing. Now, normally it wouldn't be on our radar, because when I've talked to you in the past, you're like, Sloan, stay in your lane. Why are you worrying about healthcare? Well, the problem is they're recruiting patients. They're going into these schools. They're setting up clinics in a lot of instances, not promoting the right things like diabetes prevention, some of the things that we're really concerned about, right? No vaping, all that. They're doing this indoctrination, and what gives them a foothold is some policies that the legislature have made, some that the state school board has voted on, like this social emotional learning. In other words, some of the things that have come top down has enabled and I don't want to say it's kind of a strong word, the weaponization in some cases of some of these hospital systems. And so you're handling that in this case, and you've handled it with ESG and some other things.
Well, I absolutely agree. And this is a very serious topic, and on all kinds of fronts. But, at the end of the day, what our court case is about is our authority as a state health plan board not to have taxpayer money go toward these benefits. That's it. And so we'll see what happens in that regard. And you brought up ESG, which is another topic. It's the reason I think I've made all the right enemies as the keeper of the public purse, because I've taken on the healthcare cartel, the prescription drug cartel, the insurance cartel, and the Wall Street cartel. And ESG, stands for environmental social governance. I believe, especially today, it should stand for energy independence, safe streets and neighborhoods, and good government. That's what ESG should stand for: energy independence, safe streets and neighborhoods, good government. But it doesn't. And what happened is all these ESG policies came into our pension systems, where people were taking the pension money of those that teach, protect, and serve, and taxpayers like them, and politicizing this money. This money does not belong to Larry Fink and BlackRock. This money belongs to those that teach, protect, and serve, and taxpayers like them. So ESG I think, was an attempt to call something a certain thing called ESG so that they could charge higher management fees. I am not in favor of higher management fees. I'm in favor of high margin of safety with low management fees is what I focus on as the keeper of the public purse. And let me tell you how crazy this has gotten. I know we've gone off one topic into another, but how crazy this has gotten is that there's an ESG index where Tesla was removed from the index and a major oil company was added to it. What's ESG about that? And the fact is, what we did on this particular topic is we governed. We negotiated all of our fees with BlackRock down to the bare minimums because a lot of these contracts were put in place before I was the state treasurer, and some of them have 12 to 15 years of life on them, but very quickly. And secondly, we removed all of our proxies from Larry Fink, BlackRock, and New York City. All of our voting proxies now sit at 3200 Atlantic Avenue in Raleigh, North Carolina. We now vote our proxies to reflect our culture of those that teach, protect, and serve, and taxpayers like them. And the third thing, and there was an article about this I just read this morning. It was obviously from 4 months ago. I called on Larry Fink to be fired. The reason I called on Larry Fink to be fired is that I did not hire him to politicize your money. I hired him to make you money. And he sort of lost his mission. Now, Larry Fink did not get fired, but his salary was just cut by 30%. Still makes $25 million a year. You can still buy a lot of good steaks in Raleigh, in Holly Springs for $25 million a year. But more importantly, there's three big players in this world, Sloan: Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock. You may have read 7 weeks ago, the CEO of Vanguard came out and said, we are not going to have anything to do with ESG policies anymore at Vanguard. We're going to focus on making money for people. So Larry Fink is still in his position, but I think the choir singing that they're no longer going to tolerate somebody politicizing their pension money. I think that had a big impact on the Vanguard CEO.
Well, I did too. And what you're talking about, viewers, you might be saying, God, wait, we're so far flung now from education or healthcare. We're actually not, because here's the theme. It is radicals appropriating state property for their own political ends. What we're talking about is, the retirement funds. A lot of folks work very hard. They deserve that. And it's being possibly frittered away with bad investments and folks that are not doing their fiduciary duty. Instead, they're, with this ESG. Same thing is going on ECU, UNC, and Duke, because see, the outer manifestation of ESG, kind of tied to DEI, I know we've all heard that, is this gender ideology. It used to be the civil rights of the BLM and things like that. It's actually the gender ideology, and people are actually getting hurt. It's people taking wonderful medical schools, venerable institutions like UNC School of Med and ECU, the state's two public medical schools, completely perverting them to the point where they're almost weaponized against the people they're supposed to protect. Same thing with our public schools. Not every district, but I'm sorry, an increasing majority of them.
Is it I am against discrimination. And when you have one club that's allowed to be promoted and exist and others that aren't, to me, that's discrimination. So I'm sorry that has occurred to you, but it's not only the club itself, it's the free speech that may come along with that, which I think all of us are very concerned about. Something that Sloan and others have worked on over the last few months is dealing with, gender in sports. You may not know this, Luke, but I've been racing motorcycles for 47 years. And I was national champion a few years ago. I've been two-time state champion, and I hope to race again one day. This is the most competitive form of dirt bike racing in the world. It's called the GNCC series. The races are 2 hours long, and I'm on the track generally with about 600 people your age, who are a lot more fit and have a lot more energy than I do. But my point of saying that to you is that even though that 600 of us are on the track at one time, we get scored differently. And I want to tell you that in the morning races, which are the amateur races, the fastest riders in the amateur races are women. Period. Look, in the amateur class, and that's the morning races. Now in the pros, when they race in the night, I mean at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the pros a woman could race in the pros, and there'll probably be a time when that is allowed. But if you just look at the lap times of a 2 hour cross country motorcycle race over the woods, through the hills, over logs and creeks and rivers, you would see that there's a dramatic difference in the performance of those two groups. And it would be horrific for one of these pro riders to step down and start racing in the 10 o'clock amateur race with us. So it's not just the clubs, it's not just the freedom of speech, it's also things having to do with sports. And I'm very, very concerned about that, as I think you are also.
Yes, yes. The entirety of the gender ideology in schools has really gotten out of hand. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the best example I can give you is what happened at Moore County. I don't know if you've been following this, but during the month of April, the Moore County School Board released a new bill. It was known as the Parents' Bill of Rights. What this bill included was that teachers would be required to be able to tell the parents of their students if they're showing signs of gender dysphoria. Like if they decided to change their pronoun, decided to identify as a different gender, decided to basically, if they showed signs of gender dysphoria, the teachers would be required to tell the parents, not to out them, not to be rude, but simply just to inform the parents, let them know what's going on and let them know that their child is doing this, and have the parents be able to make the decision of how to handle all of it. However, once the news of that got out to the public, the LGBT community did not like that at all. One organization in particular was an organization known as Sandhills Pride. Sandhills Pride is a nonprofit LGBT advocacy group. You can see them on Facebook. I usually follow them on Facebook just so I can see what they're talking about. And in response to the bill getting signed, they decided to protest the very night that the school board was signing the bill. And then what they did next was they had a handful of kids, I'm going to say 6 total, high school kids, and they were all basically stating the case of how this bill is bad, why is it bad, and why no one should have it. However, when you pay attention to the arguments, you realize that, well, one, they're very vague and also are not very convincing, but two, they are the very arguments that the Sandhills Pride advocacy group has been saying on their social media platforms. You can go to one of their platforms and they can it's basically a cheat sheet for these people. So they're just saying the same nonsense over and over again, and you're not getting convinced at all. So obviously the Moore County School Board, they didn't bat down. They obviously signed the bill, which rightfully so. However, less than 2 days later, they decided to host a walkout at my own school. I saw how it happened, and it was just insane. Now, the funny thing about this is that they tried to brag about it, saying that we got over 250 students here, which that sounds a lot. However, considering that Pinecrest is a school of over 2,000 students, no, this wasn't nothing. No one really cared about this. In fact, my brother, who goes to that school, he was trying to go to that protest, and the reason why was because all the students, the only reason why they went there was because they just wanted to ditch school. The school knew about it, so they gave students an option to walk out if they wanted to, and obviously all the students did it. The students that did it, and they only did it because they wanted to get out of school. And it really just further shows how people, it really shows how little anyone cares about this issue. It really was nothing. This wasn't doing anything to trans people. And the fact that the Sandhills Pride community was trying to say otherwise is just insane. And it really just shows that they really do not care about these kids. And
they're using you guys. Yes, these activists.
Exactly. Like,
yeah.
I mean, the 6 kids, these kids really had no idea what they were talking about. They were saying complete nonsense. And the fact is, the most mind-boggling thing about all this is it really makes you wonder, what does the Sandhills community, what does the Sandhills Pride community get out of this? Because they obviously were hosting all of this. They decided to host the event. They decided to do all of this. And yet, well, it really makes you wonder, what were they really getting out of this at the end? Well, I can tell you. Yep. As you guys know, the Sandhills Pride is a nonprofit organization, and their leader, Lauren Mathers, she is able to receive donations for this organization for doing things exactly like this. So when she's doing stories, or when she's getting on the news for protesting events or hosting walkouts at school, it really makes you think, is she really doing this for the kids, or is she just doing this to get publicity and to get money? Because it sounds like it's the latter.
So yeah.
Well, I'm sorry you're dealing with that, Luke, and as I said earlier when I was talking to Sloan, it's we've lost our focus. The focus should be on education and joy of achievement, not indoctrination, which is what you're describing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, and so really dealing with the access to children by radicals. And again, this is a subject that's, as you know, Mr. Treasurer, is very upsetting for the school boards, principals, teachers also. Children are being used. I think that, you know, the rank and file voter, the rank and file person in North Carolina, live and let live, right? They're not going to, you know, make any judgments, as they shouldn't, on what someone else does in their personal time, whatever. But it is using children like Luke, etc. And so you're running for governor. So I want to close out with just a couple more things about this. Your opponent has been very vociferously decrying these things for a very long time. You have actually been doing stuff about it in terms of this lawsuit, which was very brave. Most leaders would have caved, you guys. Mr. Treasurer did not. That's, you know, I've been talking about that for a while. So when we're talking about running, can you beat Josh Stein, sir?
Well, let me just say that Josh Stein and I have been on the ballot twice together. I believe there's been nearly 12 million votes cast in those 2 elections for either him or myself. In his 2 elections combined, Josh Stein has won by less than 40,000 votes. On the same ballots, on the same day, I've beat my opponents by a combined 580,000 votes, and also received more votes than in North Carolina than anyone who's ever run for president of the United States. And this goes back to Luke and also to you, Sloan. My point of saying that is simply this. I believe that people are ready to vote for someone instead of against someone. For Luke's generation, especially in this world where people will share anything and facts don't really matter like they did when I was growing up, Luke and his folks his age are going to have to monastically focus on, when it comes to public officials and their coveted right to vote, which so many people died for, which is the reason we're celebrating Memorial Day today. Luke and his fellow students are going to have to figure out who is talking to me like an adult and who is saying the things that make common sense, regardless of what political party they're a member of. Who is talking to me like an adult and what they say makes common sense. That's why I think that my ballot strength in the general election is so much greater than Josh Stein's. And that's on top of the fact that Josh Stein always outspends his opponents 4-1. I always get outspent 4-1.
The numbers are there.
And
You're
even,
on the side. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm very happy with my ballot strength. I'm very happy with the fact that people like voting for someone instead of against somebody. And we'll maybe do another podcast at some point, but there are serious challenges facing our state and our country over the next few years, not to mention the ones we're facing even today with inflation and the oppression of the thought that people should have a joy of achievement and upward mobility in their life. And what I try to do in this campaign is not only talk to people like adults and hopefully what they hear makes common sense, but also want people to know that they're not invisible to me. I'm sitting here as the keeper of the public purse. I'm wearing a suit and a tie, and I'm on this fancy Zoom call. But most of my life was spent using my hands and my back and my feet to make a living. And I want the forgotten woman and forgotten man of this state to understand there's someone in the governor's mansion who not only will be the best governor money can't buy, which I will be because I've been the best treasurer money can't buy, but more importantly, that I know who they are. The forgotten woman and man of our state, I'll characterize them very quickly, don't have enough money to have political influence. And I think everybody knows what that means. They make just a little bit too much money, Luke, to get help from time to time. So they spend their entire lives working 1 and 2 jobs, paying their taxes and praying for a better outcome. Those are the people that I want to vote for me.
Excellent. Well said. We have a lot of problems, and you're a doer with a excellent track record of doing and standing up. So thank you again for joining us tonight. And then I want to thank you, Luke. This is your inaugural interview. I think you killed it. I'm proud of you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
He's been behind the scenes up until now. So this has been a very good interview, very insightful. Thank you very much for joining us. And I need your help with this camera here. It was fell.
Yeah. Hey, Sloan, before you sign off, I just want to tell Luke what I told the students down at Cleveland County Community College 2 weeks ago at the commencement address, that even though he and I just met for the first time, I know that God possibly made him better at something than anyone else in the whole world. Luke is not better than anyone else, but it's very possible that God made him better at something than anyone else in the whole world. And it's his responsibility to associate with people with integrity, ability, and passion, so that when he does get to be 65 years old one day, he'll look back and realize that he's standing on the shoulders of people who helped get him to that point. The second very quick thing is, especially for people your age, Luke, is to understand that it doesn't matter how handsome you are, how pretty you are, how wealthy you are, how lucky you were in the environment you were born in. Eventually, as I said earlier, you're going to be looking back and realizing you're standing on the shoulders of somebody else. The third very quick thing is that as much as you might think that you're in control of your life, the big decisions that are going to be coming your way over the next few years are going to happen when you're not in the room. And so you need to prepare yourself in terms of how you present yourself, like on this Zoom call and otherwise. You need to prepare yourself so that we can do a whole podcast on the benefits of the doubt that I've gotten from being a garbage collector and a motorcycle mechanic to being the state treasurer, because a lot of these important decisions, Luke, are made when you're not in the room. And lastly, anytime the world asks for volunteers for the toughest jobs, always be known as the person that raises their hand. Because if you become known as the person who volunteers and raises their hand for the toughest jobs, it's unimaginable what you can accomplish.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the advice.
Great advice.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we will
Thank
see you
you.
next time. Wonderful. And I'll see you out on the campaign trail, I'm sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Sloan.
All right.
And
Oh, and,
Luke, work hard so you don't end up like me.
I will, sir. Thank you. And thank you, Sloan, for having me back on the show. It really is good to be back.
Absolutely, Luke. All right. Good evening, gentlemen.